on Dialogue Weekend. China is asking for feedback about permanent residence rules for foreigners. How is the system changing? The United States has placed new restrictions on Chinese journalists. How is media becoming a wider battleground in competition between countries? And this week's newsmaker. Now, on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to this edition of Dialogue Weekend. I'm Xu Qingduo. Today I'm joined via satellite by Anand Tangen, independent current affairs commentator, and Max Rubenstein, editor of APAC News, and via Skype by and He Jing, attorney from Anjie Law Firm, and Wang Cong, reporter from the Global Times. Welcome to both of you, all of you actually. Well, China has released a new set of regulations to relax the standards for foreign citizens to apply for permanent residence in China, also known as China's green card. The draft has not only attracted attention from the international community, but also from Chinese citizens, some of whom have very strong opinions, actually. So, He Jing, there's an existing regulation already how foreign citizens can apply for permanent residence in China. So why is there a need for new regulations now?
Residency is definitely not anything new. In fact, that older law, the regulations goes back to 1988. But the recent rules was dated in 2004. Now, if you look at the proposed regulation, it's really based on the new immigration law. We call it the entry and also exists the border control law. Now, I think the key purpose to have the new set of regulations is really expand in a way that expand the possibility to have more foreign talents to become a permanent residence in China. If you're looking at the old rules, probably only the big stars or the key business executives are allowed or having the possibility to become permanent residents. But under the proposed new rules, the very talented people with a certain like high degrees, like doctor degrees, or certain work experience up to certain years will be able to get the permanent residence. So that means that China would be able to attract more of the foreign citizens to become part of our Chinese permanent residency. If you're looking at the Article 1 of this, the new regulations, really about what we call expanding the being open and reform policy in China. I think that's a key purpose.
Mm-hmm. Can we say it's getting easier for people from other countries, if they want to come back to China and find a job or live in China, it's actually easier for them to apply for a permanent residence here in China under the new regulation?
Yes, of course. That's what we call eligibility, right? It's to make more people eligible. It's that, you do not have this a huge star. You do not have to make outstanding, huge contribution to China. But if you are really useful, if you have a good background experience, that makes it possible. And if you are the parents or the children of these people, then you can also get in.
Mm-hmm. Well, historically, China has been sending migrants to other countries. Now it's becoming a destination country as its booming economy, attracts international immigrants in search of jobs or new lives. Given this gradual process of change, Tangen, how do you compare China's immigration practice, with that of other countries?
Well, it used to lag. I mean, there was only 10,000 people who were granted green cards by 2017. Now China is entering the global competition for the best people that it can find. And this is something other countries have been doing for years. It's based on people who add something unique to China's economy, whether it's investment or know-how. So, the problem right now is the backlash throughout China is based on this kind of social media myth that somehow low-paid workers are going to flood into China. And that is not the situation at all. But hysteria, as we all know, knows no boundaries.
Well, yeah, we will ask lawyer He Jing to deal with that too. There's this backlash on the social media mostly. So what is your understanding of this strong reaction to this draft regulation? Is that
I think a couple of things.
something you expected or out of expectation?
I think it's out of expectation from both the government, also probably the legal community, and a lot of sort of quote unquote accusation are about that the proposed regulations are not specific enough, are given too much discretion to the governments. How to define the making a lot of contribution. You have not defined the certain criteria. There's a definite misunderstanding. Okay, this is the proposed regulations, and it's not supposed to give a too detailed specific test. It is a complicated job. You're supposed to have another set of implementing, we call rules, to set out the more criteria, and that will give the government more flexibility to change that afterwards. This is the regulation is a law, and this is something that are not easy to change. I think right now the kind of a definition are sort of broad, not very specific. It has it's actually reasonable, but however, that give a lot of sort of excuses for the social media, for people to attack that from the social media. But underneath of this attacks, I think people are somehow reacting to some more of concerns. They feel like, well, maybe there's a flooding of the foreign workers. And another reaction is probably they react to the fact that all this the media report that United States or other countries are tightening control of the immigrant policy. So people, I think some people probably, the netizens are reacting to say, hey, why should we make it so easy? But it's completely different context, completely different context.
Well, exactly. If you look at the past 40 years, for example, since the reform and opening up to the outside world, according to OECD figures, 200,000 Chinese PhD working in developed countries, and 2 million Chinese with master's degree working for OECD countries. So basically, there is a brain drain. In the past 10 plus years since China introduced this permanent residence system, China has only issued a rather limited number of green cards. So this brain drain, I guess, you need somehow to reverse the brain drain to bring back some of the talents basically flowing outside from China. So are we seeing China ready to welcome more immigrants from the rest of the world? Tangen?
Yes, I mean, this is a global competition. If you do not get the human resources, you will not make the technological breakthroughs. If you go to the U.S. and you start looking at the intellectual property and who is developing, you're not going to see many Smiths or Browns. What you're going to see is Wong and Patel. These Indian and Chinese names dominate the STEM educational side, and also in terms of research development and patent applications. Yes, they're doing it under companies, U.S. company names, European company names. But this is not just about bringing Chinese back to China. It is about allowing China to reach this kind of threshold that it needs to get beyond this middle income trap. And it's unfortunate that people see this as alarming. We're not talking about millions of people coming in. We're talking about most a couple 100,000. And each one of them is going to bring something to China that's going to produce jobs, wealth, and push China forward. So it's partly, I think, a reaction to the kind of nativist, racist stuff that has been happening as a result of coronavirus. Right. You see a lot of people in China sensing that they're not wanted, and I think that is having some reflection on this issue.
Yeah, it could be. It's more complicated, probably, this knee-jerk reaction to this not well-informed analysis, let's say. Well, let's move on to another China-U.S. related issue here. The All China Journalists Association has issued a statement voicing condemnation and opposition to a demand made by the U.S. State Department to cap the number of U.S.-based Chinese journalists. Washington has set a limit of no more than 100 Chinese citizens from 5 Chinese media organizations to be allowed to work in the U.S. As a result, about 60 Chinese journalists will actually be expelled from the U.S. The 5 Chinese media organizations are Xinhua News Agency, China Radio International, China Daily, China Global Television Network, CGTN, us, and the local distributor of People's Daily. So we have Wang Cong from the Global Times. I mean, this is the latest restriction. Well, the latest restriction follows a previous Cold War style move designating these Chinese news outlets as foreign missions, which will force them to share their information, including those of their employees, with the U.S. government, including intelligence agencies. So Marcus Rubinstein from Australia, I mean, you have been following this, let's say, call it dispute between China and the U.S. for some time. So what's your reaction to that? Mm-hmm. Marcus?
Look, I think, yeah, thanks, Tim. I think the reaction of the U.S. is probably expected. There's a number of factors here. We're in an election year in the United States, and Donald Trump's base is very, very nationalistic. So I guess standing up for what are perceived as American rights might play well with a domestic audience. So there's an element of that caught up in it. But I think ultimately it's just a political payback for China expelling 3 Wall Street Journal correspondents over the headline which read, "China is the real sick man of Asia," which I took to task in APAC News, my publication, as quite an inflammatory and a racist headline.
Mm-hmm. Well, Wang Cong, you are a reporter from the Global Times. What's your first response to the news? Like basically 60 Chinese journalists will be expelled from the U.S.
Yeah, first of all, from someone who I worked in Washington, D.C. for 1 year, and then I studied journalism in the United States for 4 years. So to see that, the Trump administration took this, I would say, unprecedented move to expel, in effect, expel 60 Chinese journalists, it's just, sad, and I think it has a lot of dangerous consequences. Now, as the previous commentator mentioned, and many others have noted, this has been painted as a response to China's revocation of the 3 Wall Street Journal reporters' credentials. But I want to point out this is not what the U.S. response is. This is not a tit-for-tat, interaction between the 2 capitals. The nature of the U.S. move is very different from what China did with the 3 Wall Street Journal reporters. As the commentator noted, and many others have noted, the Wall Street Journal headline is clearly racist, and China has, expressed its, condemnation, its indignation, and then got no answer from the Wall Street Journal newspaper. So it had to take that, and that is supported by public opinion in China if you, read all these responses on Chinese social media. However, the United States, Washington took this measure as if, it's a response, but if you read carefully what the statement, what Mike Pompeo said was very different because he said that this is about reciprocity. This is not about reciprocity because, yes, the number of Chinese journalists in the U.S. might be a little bit more, but there are only 9 Chinese media outlets in Washington. There are 29 U.S. Media outlets in China. So this is not about reciprocity or response to China's action. This is more fitting to the U.S. line about the Chinese political system, Chinese ideology. So this is a deeper, a more serious action rather than just a response to China's action.
Right, right. We'll deal with like the basic different issues, 2 related issues. The first one, for example, it is tit-for-tat retaliation. Marcus, if a Wall Street Journal is punished for their racist opinion piece, the headline, there appeared to be no wrongdoing by the Chinese media outlets in Washington, right? They didn't do anything, say, interfering in the internal affairs of the United States or their election, or they didn't do anything threatening the U.S. nation, right?
Yeah. When I sort of characterize it as a tit-for-tat or as a political response, I didn't necessarily suggest it was a measured response. I think if you wind back to the Chinese Foreign Ministry's comments on the Wall Street Journal article, the Chinese Foreign Ministry asked for an apology and certainly that people be held to account. And held to account is a vague thing. They might have been disciplined or got an email or a letter. But the Chinese government wasn't demanding retraction from the story or retribution. They wanted an apology. So had the Wall Street Journal taken the simple move of issuing an apology, we wouldn't have reached this impasse. And as I wrote in a piece on my website, that the Wall Street Journal I didn't think was ever going to apologize, and I think it's an outcome that suits them. I think it's an outcome that suits the US government. Yes, the Chinese correspondents, 60 or so, who, you know, in the minutiae of the announcement from the State Department, they don't have to leave China. Sorry, they don't have to leave the United States. They simply can no longer work as journalists. So in a practical sense, they have no jobs, so they will have to return to China. But yeah, it is a move, and I think it's very much a political move, and it has this undercurrent of the Cold War, which America and China seem to find themselves in now, and I think it's very much an economic and a trade Cold War. Mm-hmm. Certainly there are undertones of a strategic Cold War. But I think, yeah, it's
Marcus,
an economic
how do you see
rival the United States finds itself against?
Right. How do you see the differences, between different practice, I would say, between the Chinese media outlets and the U.S. Media? The U.S. mostly is a corporate media. For Chinese media, yes, the state-owned media, they pay more attention to public interests. When it comes to coverage of the Australia, of the United States, it's mostly, say, objective coverage with a positive tone. But of course, U.S. media is a different practice, right?
Yeah, very much. Not only the U.S. media, but the Western media. I mean, the Western media, and particularly in the U.S., but Australia and Britain are other examples, have this combative relationship with their own government. I mean, Donald Trump has expelled, I'm not sure what the exact number is, but certainly dozens of U.S. journalists from the White House. He's banned American journalists from the White House. He's banned American journalists from state events. CNN, he's had run-ins with them. So there's this combative relationship there. But what changes is in terms of how the U.S. media then looks at China. And it's clear from the tone of their reporting and the nature of their reporting, it's very much an extension of U.S. foreign policy, and really they see themselves as advocates, not necessarily of the totality of the relationship the U.S. enjoys with China, but just on the minutiae, the specifics, the areas of disagreement, and they highlight those. And now, with the backdrop of COVID-19, they're using a very, very sinister tone, I think. Stan Grant, who was the CNN correspondent in Beijing for a number of years, and no friend of the Chinese government by any stretch, he said in Sydney just 2 weeks ago that the language of the Western media is now the language of conflict, and it's the language of war, and he said, and it's a damaging, harmful tone. So it's not just people like myself who have many friends in China and many great connections in China. It's Western journalists who have been adversaries of China who are openly admitting that this situation has really gone very far, and it's a very aggressive and confronting tone.
Mm-hmm. Well, Anna, the U.S. has this big power competition strategy since the end of 2017, in particular with China, of course. Do you think the handling of the media agencies, has been somehow, they are being weaponized in the national competition, in Washington's competition with China, say?
Absolutely. This is asymmetrical in the sense that the situation was that the U.S. named all of China's agencies as, in essence, under the government and put them under diplomatic rules. Then China took umbrage at this Wall Street Journal editorial, and then there was this, let's remove 60 Chinese journalists. Now, remember, I agree, Donald Trump acts as an autocrat, and the first thing he does, and this is the hypocrisy of it, is he accuses others of doing it. This is a classic Trump move. He does something and accuses others, and then he says, the only reason I do this is because they do something wrong. So this is nothing more than, you know, the ramblings of somebody who probably is going to be pushed out of office by circumstances, his handling of COVID-19, also the economic effects that follow on it. And this is kind of flailing along. But it's doing, and I would agree with my colleagues, real damage to the relationship between the U.S. and China, both the feeling that there's racism involved and also that the U.S. has, in essence, built a wall, a cold one. You can describe it how you want, but one that will impact the relationship for years to come.
Mm-hmm. Well, the U.S. says, you know, the decision was based on principle of reciprocity, as we mentioned earlier, actually from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. You know, here's a quote: "Our goal is reciprocity, as we have done in other areas of the U.S.-China relationship. We seek to establish a long overdue level playing field." So, what's your take, Anna? Long overdue level playing field between U.S. and China.
Well, this is the rallying cry for basically we want to contain China, and this is exactly how they justify it. This goes back to this kind of hypocrisy. It's not follow what the U.S. has done. Don't you know, look at us for the wars that we've started or the uncertainty, the economic uncertainty that we've created. It's all China's fault. And I think this is just simply a straw horse to hide behind while Donald Trump tries to achieve his objective, which is basically creating a world, a kind of Hunger Games, with the U.S. at the center and every other country, basically a vassal state. And it's unfortunately not, well, fortunately, it's not going to work.
Well, Marcus, you know, some in China have suggested that, you know, given this often biased and anti-China coverage by U.S. media, China may have every reason to expel more journalists, you know, working in China as a response. Of course, China is considering its response. So, what's your opinion? You know, what should China do in response, or maybe strategic patience?
Well, look, I hope that's not the case. You know, I think all parties, all interested parties, you know, should hope for, you know, a remedy to these situations and an improvement in relations. But in terms of the hypocrisy, I absolutely agree. I mean, it comes through the media as well. And I don't want to keep harping on the Wall Street Journal story, but I will say, and I have written, that the expression "China is the real sick man of Asia" is a very, very offensive racial tone. Now, in the United States, language has taken on an enormous sensitivity, and there are words applying to races, applying to people of different sexuality and of different religions you simply cannot use in the United States. They are absolutely forbidden. Now, calling China the sick man of Asia is up with that. So this is where I think the media is in for a little bit of hypocrisy, because it says, oh, it's acceptable to call that. We're not calling Chinese people sick. We're calling the government. No, they are calling Chinese people sick. They're categorizing that, and they would never use such labels in the United States. And to give an idea of the seriousness of the nature of these media tones, the News of the World, which is owned by News Corporation, part of the Murdoch empire, which owns the Wall Street Journal, was embarked in a massive scandal where it was bugging the phones of members of the royal family, of families of dead soldiers, of victims of terrorist attacks, of victims of crime. And this was an unbridled campaign for years, which was exposed. And the advertisers of that newspaper said, we refuse to advertise with you. So it was the market which effectively shut it down. So, you know, there are limits in the United States, but it appears as though those limits don't apply to critiques and criticisms
against China
and
or against the Chinese, right? Well, let's leave it there for now and take a look at this week's Newsmaker. obviously, Biden, the former U.S. vice president, was the biggest winner in the Super Tuesday of the Democratic primary. So, Tangen, how did he turn the situation around so quickly and in such a powerful way after doing so badly at the start of the race?
Well, you have to look at the nature of the primaries that were going in. When you start looking at Iowa and New Hampshire, these are areas with very small, very liberal votes. They have a caucus system in one. It's very difficult to gauge. Now, they always say that there are forerunners in determining who the presidential candidates are. But the truth is, Super Tuesday is the real counting. Obviously, South Carolina was very important. It's established some momentum. But what he has been able to do with very little money, relatively. He wasn't spending $500 million like Bloomberg, and et cetera. He was able to galvanize a lot of women voters, of African-American voters, some Hispanic voters, white voters. So he established that he has a very broad appeal. That's why he had 10 states. And that has nicknamed him as the comeback kid of this particular race. No, people were, and I was included, in essence counting him out, that he didn't have the kind of traction that would be necessary. And since he won, he's been able to raise $77 million. That's quite an accomplishment. And I think there's more to come from Bloomberg, who will be creating his own PAC to back the Democratic candidate. So you're going to see a race in which the middle is now surging ahead, and Bernie Sanders is trying to play catch-up and being very aggressive about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, now the race is between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. And the next big date is Tuesday again, the 10th of March, another Tuesday, which is described as a mini Super Tuesday. So is Biden going to repeat the success?
I would expect that he would. He has the momentum now. Bernie has decided to go negative. He's attacking him on, kind of old issues, new issues, health care, what he's going to do for the different areas. There are some groups who are looking at his vote for the war in Iraq, and also there are concerns about his son, and those will continue. But right now, Biden has the momentum. If you talk to Democratic voters, their number one issue is finding somebody who can beat Donald Trump, and that is going to be the way the most of them decide, Bernie bros aside.
But is Biden, for example, if he's the candidate of the Democrat Party, is he able to defeat Trump?
Well, a lot of that depends on, he'll get a tailwind if, in fact, this coronavirus, the handling of it goes badly. It appears to be doing so. If the economic follow-on consequences push the U.S. into recession, and the Democrats are able to connect the dots that his mishandling of one led to the other, the myth of Donald Trump will be over. He is not the great deal maker. He's not the smart guy in the room. He's simply somebody who fumbled the ball, and on a health issue where people are dying, and that led to an economic downturn where people lose jobs. If that's the case, Biden is pretty much a shoo-in, assuming he is the candidate for Democrats.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty still ahead. With that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to Wang Cong from Global Times, He Jing from Anjin Law Firm, and Max Rubenstein from APAC News, and Anand Tangen, independent current affairs commentator. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. You can find me on Twitter, Xu Qinduo. Thank you for watching. See you next time.